All right, good morning. Notice of the time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by publicizing same in the Omaha World Herald and the Nebraska Press Association, OPPD outlets newsletters, OPPD.com, and social media, by displaying such notice on the first level of OPPD administrative offices, and by emailing such notice to each of the district's directors on June 12, 2026. A copy of the proposed agenda for this meeting has been maintained on a current basis and is readily available for public inspection in the office of the district's corporate secretary. Additionally, a copy of the Open Meetings Act is available for inspection on OPPD.com. Thank you all for joining us. As a reminder to those joining us on WebEx, please mute your microphones to reduce background noise. To members of the public, thank you for attending. You're in listen-only mode. If you have any technology questions, please use the chat feature in WebEx to communicate with the event host. Our agenda for today's meeting is as follows. We'll conduct a closed session this morning to discuss two topics: corporate officer performance reviews and compensation adjustments, and CEO performance review and compensation adjustment. We'll conclude this morning's closed session no later than 9:50 a.m. in order to open the WebEx meeting to allow the public and OPPD staff to join. We'll begin public session at approximately 10 a.m. and receive reports from each committee. Director Spurgeon, do we have a motion to go into closed session?
Yes. I move that the board go into closed session at this time, 8:01 a.m., to discuss two topics. One, corporate officer performance reviews and compensation adjustments, and two, CEO performance review and compensation adjustment. With respect to the corporate officer performance reviews and compensation adjustments, a closed session is necessary because the discussion will involve competitive and confidential compensation and retention information, as well as performance evaluation information, and to prevent needless injury to the reputation of the executives, as they have not requested a public meeting. With respect to the CEO performance review and compensation adjustment, a closed session is necessary because the discussion will involve competitive and confidential compensation and retention information, as well as performance evaluation information, and to prevent needless injury to the reputation of Mr. Fernandez, as he has not requested a public meeting. This motion requires a second to move forward.
Second.
Director Bogner?
Yes.
Director Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Director Corr?
Yes.
Director Howard? Director Howard?
Yes.
Thank you. Director Hudson?
Yes.
Director Moody?
Yes.
Director Spurgeon?
Yes.
Director Williams?
Yes.
All right, thank you. The motion to go into closed session is passed. This closed session will be limited to two topics: corporate officer performance reviews and compensation adjustments, and CEO performance review and compensation adjustment. No votes or other board action will be taken. A motion and second is required to reconvene an open session.
I move that we reconvene.
Second.
Okay. Bogner?
Yes.
Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Corr?
Yes.
Howard?
Yes.
Hudson?
Yes.
Moody?
Yes.
Spurgeon?
Yes.
Williams?
Yes.
All right, thank you. The motion to come out of closed session at 10:02 a.m. is carried. This closed session was limited to two topics: corporate officer performance reviews and compensation adjustments, and CEO performance review and compensation adjustment. No votes or other board action were taken. Notice of the time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by publicizing same in the Omaha World Herald and the Nebraska Press Association, OPPD outlets newsletter, OPPD.com, and social media, by displaying such notice on the first level of OPPD administrative offices, and by emailing such notice to each of the district's directors on June 12, 2026. Thank you all for joining us. As a reminder for those joining us on WebEx, please mute your microphones to reduce background noise. To members of the public, thank you for attending. You're in listen-only mode. If you have any technology questions, please use the chat feature in WebEx to communicate with the event host. We'll take public comments at the end of today's meeting, as well as the board meeting on June 18th, 2026, which will be conducted virtually via WebEx and begin at 5 p.m. The public may attend remotely via WebEx by going to OPPD.com, or the public may view the WebEx in person at OPPD administrative offices located at 1919 Exarban Drive in the Wahoo Conference Room. Joining me today are my fellow board members, Amanda Bogner, Mike Kavanaugh, Sarah Howard, John Hudson, Craig Moody, Mary Spurgeon, and Eric Williams. We also have members of our executive leadership team, including our Vice President General Counsel Pete Fisher, Tim Talkin with the Fraser Stryker Law Firm, and OPPD staff. Aaron, can you let me know how many attendees are in this meeting?
51.
Additionally, we currently have 51 attendees in this meeting, consisting of OPPD employees and members of the public. We'll begin with committee reports and a review of board work plan items presented by the following directors. Director Spurgeon will report on governance, Director Bogner on risk, Director Williams will report on system management and nuclear oversight, customer and public engagement will be reported on by Director Howard, and Director Moody will report on finance. Following the committee reports, we'll move into presentations on financial stewardship, oversight and monitoring, infrastructure investment, governance, and board matters. We'll conclude the day with public comments on items of district business. Josh Clark will now give a safety briefing.
Good morning. Welcome to the committee meeting. Because safety is our top priority, we begin each meeting with a few physical, cybersecurity, and psychological safety reminders. If anybody's not feeling well, we want you to make sure you're staying home, getting some rest, hydrating, and then also seeking medical attention if needed. No matter where you're located at, always be aware of any emergency exits, first aid equipment, AEDs, fire extinguishers, and also your severe weather shelters. Keep your area free of slip, trips, and other hazards, and stay alert for changing conditions. Know how to reach responders, 911, our control center, or any other local emergency numbers. If anybody needs any assistance during the meeting, please use the chat or even speak up, and we'll try to get assistance to you as quickly as possible. For cybersecurity, be cautious with suspicious emails and unknown links. Do not click anything that seems untrustworthy. And for those of us in the OPPD environment, we have a handy little fish alert button right in Outlook. Psychological safety is essential for productive collaboration. Please encourage curiosity and continuous learning. Speak and act with respect. Embrace constructive conflict. Value diverse perspectives. Build trust through transparency. And let's give everyone a voice and invite questions and ideas. And finally, here at OPPD, we always remember our core values. We have a passion to serve. We honor our community, and we care for one another. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Josh. Before we move into our regular agenda, I want to take a moment to address some recent events in our community. Public power has always been rooted in open, civil dialogue. We value passionate debate, differing viewpoints, and the transparency that allows our customer owners to hold us accountable. That openness is a principle that this board and OPPD take seriously. Over the last few weeks, several of our elected board members and members of OPPD leadership have been subjected to repeated personal harassment and implicit intimidation outside of normal public engagement channels. While we welcome critique of our decisions, conduct that targets individuals personally or attempts to influence our work through fear is unacceptable. These matters have been referred to the appropriate authorities, and we will not comment further so as to not interfere with ongoing review. Efforts that put our employees, our board members, or our public facilities at risk are not part of the public power governance and decision-making process. We remain steadfast in our commitment to public engagement, respectful discourse, and the open exchange of ideas that will continue to ensure that our collectively owned utility lives up to the highest ideals of public power. Our focus, as always, remains on safely delivering our customer owners reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy services while living our core values of passion, honor, and care. Thank you all for partnering with us to keep our community conversations productive, civil, and most importantly, safe for all involved. And with that, I'd like to start our agenda and go to Director Spurgeon, please, for governance pre-committee report.
Thank you, Chair Corey. The governance pre-committee meeting was held on June 9th. We had a 2-hour meeting that day. Following our safety briefing, we had a discussion with the CEO regarding the compensation adjustment for our vice presidents. And then we had a private consultation for another 15 minutes regarding the CEO performance evaluation and compensation. Item 3 was a brief review of prior month's action items that was taken quickly. Item 4, local electric grid 6744. The goal was to learn about the responses the district is taking in response to that resolution. Number 5 was some information regarding our large load growth customers and the insights that the team had to share with us there. 6, governance policy and board review. This is a little bit of time that we're taking to review the other 2/3 of the governance structures that help to guide OPPD's board and executive leadership team. So we spent just a little bit of time reviewing that. We reviewed a severance agreement in excess of $50,000, and we will see that later today in today's meeting. I was happy to report for item 8 that no board members had been referred to me for ethics violations since our last meeting. We had a little discussion about board governance workshop. Just for board members to be aware, you're going to be contacted near the end of June and in July to help set the agenda for that meeting. And a little look at the board work plan, a very brief summary of meeting. And it was a very full meeting that we concluded in 2 hours. So that is my report, Chair Four. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Bogner.
Good morning. The Risk Committee met on June 10th. I was joined by CEO Fernandez, members of the ELT, and Directors Moody and Williams. Director Spurgeon was traveling. We will see items 4 and 8 as part of today's meeting, but the committee received an ERM strategic risk update from Dan Litzkowski on significant changes to the current enterprise risks. Ms. Michelle DeSuri presented the quarterly audit and controls results and answered committee member questions. The bulk of our meeting was spent in a discussion on governance amid utility industry transformation. We were joined by Eric Douglas and Bill Slayton from LRI Resources. As you may recall, Mr. Douglas and Mr. Slayton facilitate our annual board workshop, and they were present for that discussion as they'll use information from that to shape the workshop slated in late August that Director Spurgeon referenced. We also reviewed BL2, General Counsel, and GP14, Board Expense Reimbursement, as our annual policy review process. As you may recall, BL2 was revised in October 25 ahead of OPPD hiring in-house General Counsel. And the Risk Committee does not recommend any revisions at this time, but we should review this board linkage policy again in about a year after Pete Fisher has settled into his new role as internal general counsel to make sure that it still aligns with the intent and expectations that the board has of that role. Regarding GP14, this is board expenses. We revised and simplified this policy in September 25. And during our discussion, we pressure tested a variety of cases to make sure that the current framework still covers typical board member related expenses. Director Moody also confirmed that the review process that now involves the board treasurer is also working and does not take any inordinate amount of time to execute. So at this time, the Risk Committee does not recommend any changes to that policy either. Following those items and a review of our work plan, the board members, CEO and ELT had an opportunity to discuss other risks, primarily related to the items that Director Corr mentioned in his opening statement. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, my committee report is complete.
All right. Seeing no questions, on to Director Williams, please.
Thank you. The Systems Committee met on June 1st. We had a relatively shorter agenda than we have in recent months, which was a pleasant change. We discussed prior month committee action items, the integrated systems plan, and there will be an update later today on the integrated systems plan following workshop number 2, which was presented publicly. So we'll see that item for presentation later today. We received updates on the transmission projects that are underway across OPPD service territory, and information about those transmission projects can be found on OPPD Community Connect. There's a page for transmission, and there are sub-pages for each of the transmission projects. So if any members of the public have any questions or need additional information, I'd refer them to the OPPD Community Connect pages for those projects. We spent some time talking about engineering and craft talent pipeline, similar to availability of physical materials necessary to continue the the electric utility transition that is underway. We need the right types of people and professionals to help carry out the work at OPPD and across the utilities in the United States. And so there are different types of challenges, and it's important for the systems committee to be up to date on what's going on with availability of workforce. So we spent some time discussing that in the committee meeting. We talked about the work plan and then summarized the meeting. Work plan largely unchanged from the past. And then lastly, with the lighter agenda, we did have an opportunity for some additional discussion within the systems committee this month. And I think that is generally a successful process to allow board members and members of ELT to have an open forum for discussion. So I'm glad that we were able to get that into our agenda this month. And I'm glad that that was part of our process overall. If anyone has any questions, any members who are not on the systems committee, I'd be glad to answer those. But other than that, that is the end of my report. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Director Howard.
Yes, the Customer and Public Engagement Committee met on June 8th. And after we went over our safety briefing and our prior month committee action items, we received an update on resolution number 6744 about the local electric grid planning. And then we also received an update on our large load growth customer insights, similar to the governance committee. We are also actively working on our revisions for SD11, and you should be receiving some questions coming from me as we narrow our scope and focus for that revision and update. And with that, the CPE committee rests.
All right, thank you, Director Howard. Director Moody.
Thank you, Chair Core. The Finance Committee met on June 5th. Beyond the basic blocking and tackling of agenda items 1, 2, 6, 7, and 8, which should feel familiar to every other committee, the remaining items 3, 4, and 5 will all be discussed later today. So I don't have any need to go into the deep dive on those. That does it for me.
Great, thank you. We'll move it to Mr. Underwood for bond issuance, please.
Yeah, great. Good morning, everybody. Well, today we have John Petroulis, a manager in our Treasury organization, to talk about the close of the largest senior lien transaction in OPPD's history. And so if you've ever gone through the home ownership process, close means you took possession. So we received the funds. Mr. Petroulis, would you walk us through a few slides to illuminate that?
Yes, thank you, Brad. Yeah, so I'm going to report on the sale of our 2026A bonds. In April, the board provided us the authority to issue up to $1.4 billion worth of bonds, and that authority is good through March 31st of 2027. We priced our bonds on May 14th, and ultimately we closed on these bonds on June 9th. So the sale was led by JP Morgan and Bank of America. I want to give you just a little bit of color on the process. When we went to market, it was a very volatile market. The Iran conflict with everything that was happening with that on a day-to-day basis caused a lot of turmoil in the markets. In addition, there was a lot higher inflation reports also put pressure on the markets. This is all combined with there's a lot more bonds being sold, I guess, in the markets currently. Before, you would have a week and you'd have $5 billion worth of bonds, municipal bonds being sold in a week. Maybe 10 billion would be a very, very big week. Now the markets are regularly seeing 15 to even $20 billion worth of bonds in the week. And that puts a lot more competition in the market for OPPD to sell its bonds. Ultimately, we sold approximately $642 million worth of bonds, and that brought proceeds in of about $680 million. And that the interest rate that we will pay on these bonds, and all-in cost of these is about 4.48%. Proceeds of these bonds are going to be used to reimburse ourselves for prior capital expenditures, to pay for future capital expenditures. And then in addition, we are using capitalized interest. So some of these proceeds are being used for that capitalized interest. And despite all the headwinds that we had a very successful bond issuance. There were over 80 different investors who put in orders for our bonds, and there were 6 different investors who put in orders for over $100 million worth of our bonds. So our underwriter, JP Morgan, said they'd seen the breadth of there's been that many accounts that have been interested in recent transactions, but not the depth of having 6 different investors put in orders for over $100 million worth of bonds. What that ends up doing is that it allowed us to compress our spreads. So the bonds are sold at a municipal market rate, and then depending on your credit rating, your credit worthiness, you're going to pay a spread to that. Since we had so great of demand for our bonds, we were able to compress that spread and then to get a cheaper rate essentially for our rate payers. So one other item of note is that we decided to just sell these bonds on May 14th. Originally, we were going to sell these bonds on May 20th. That was the pricing date, but we tried to have a lot of flexibility going into these bond issuances now, having the proper disclosure documentation and so forth ready to go so that we can go into the markets when the markets are calmer and when it's a better market. Ultimately, by selling our bonds on May 14th instead of May 20th, we saved about 10 to 15 basis points on all different maturities. So each maturity is going to have a little bit different, but rates went up in that next week. So that also ended up being a good decision for the district, and it allowed us to lower the cost on these bonds. Ultimately, then, so we will. With this board item, we also attached to the board item, there is a pricing certificate. The pricing certificate will lay out the different maturities, rates, call dates, and so forth on these bonds if you're interested. And then there's also a letter from our financial advisor, essentially, that's supporting this transaction. So with that, I would open it up for any discussion. Yes, Director Spurgeon.
Thank you for that report. That sounds exciting.
It is exciting.
But I just want to say one of the things that struck me particularly. You had all the paperwork ready. You had all the documents that the companies need, the whole process needs. So you could do it on the 14th instead of the 20th. And I just one of the things that has stuck with me in these last certainly the last 3-4 years is the importance of being able to turn, to take action, to pivot sort of at a moment's notice. And you just use this opportunity to step off the block sooner than you had planned to do so. So compliments to you and all of your team on how this worked out. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for those comments. And it's truly the entire district. We have great support from our underwriters, JP Morgan and B of A, from Fraser Strikers helping us with the issuance, Kutek Rock, with our financial advisor Barclays. But the internal group is also to get this disclosure, to get these official statements and so forth put together. It is a total district-wide thing. And we've had the comment for Kutek Rock, who's our bond counsel, that OPPD does it as good as anybody, that we make sure and not omit any pertinent facts and to include what's needed in there. So it's really a testament to the entire organization through all the way to the ELT to be able to have this information ready and ready to go for the market. So thank you for those comments. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, John. Mr. Underwood, we're going to stick with you for the ST2 rates monitoring report.
Yeah, very good. Well, it's always an exciting moment when we come to this perennial time of year where we get to talk about rates. Rates are obviously a subject of high visibility and interest when it comes to the electric industry. Today we have Ms. Beth Hoyle here to go over the SD2 monitoring report. In particular, I'm really proud of the movement we're seeing in some of the affordability indices as it relates to energy burden. That's been something really exciting that we've been trying to drive down as the cost to many individuals and families rise. And so really excited to get the SD2 report. And so Beth, I'll turn it over to you to walk us through the slides.
Great, thanks, Brad. So like Brad said, I'll be presenting the SD2 monitoring report. Aaron, can you move ahead? Thank you. So in implementing this directive, there are several goals established, including maintain fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory rates, equitably assign costs across and within all customer classes, monitor affordability indicators, pursue rate process and structure changes to reflect the cost of energy when it's used, offer flexibility and options, be simple and easy to understand, and pursue the directional rate target of 10% below average published rates within the North Central region on a system average basis. And with that, we'll proceed to the updates to those items. So the next slide for the directional target, we compare OPPD to the North Central region, which includes 7 states, and the comparison is done on a system average basis and measured in cents per kWh. And we use data from the Energy Information Administration. As a reminder, SD2 is a lagging metric, so the data we will be reviewing today is based on final EIA data from 2024. OPPD experienced a modest 2.5% rate increase in 2024. And as you will see in the report, that we are continuing to meet our directional goal of 10% below our regional average, coming in at 18.7% below. Next slide. An item to note on the reporting that affects our commercial industrial metrics, the Energy Information Administration updated its reporting criteria beginning in 2023. Under the new guidelines, EIA now requires that data centers and crypto customers be classified within the commercial class. OPPD has customers that are data center customers and crypto customers on 4 of our commercial and industrial rates. And so we have aligned the SD2 report with this updated EIA guidance. However, for OPPD's internal reporting and other external reporting, data centers and crypto customers will be continue to be included in their original rate classes. Next slide. This is a 10-year historical view of how OPPD has compared to the regional and national average. In 2024, again, OPPD was 18.7% below the North Central region and 30.2% below the national average. Next slide. Going into all rate classes, OPPD is the solid black line. And for all rate classes, OPPD was at 9.04 cents per kWh, which again was 18.7% below the regional average. This is up from 2023, where we were at 9.21 cents per kWh and 15.8% below the regional average. From a national average perspective, OPPD went from 27.4% below the national average in 23, and that is up to 30.2% below in 2024. Next slides will show the average for each customer class. And so for our residential rates, OPPD is at 12.36 cents per kWh and 13% below the regional average. This is down a little bit from 14% in 2023. And for the national average, it is consistent with 2023, coming in right around that 25% below the national average. Next slide. For commercial rates, OPPD is at 8.04 cents per kWh or 27.2% below the regional average. OPPD gained competitiveness from 23 to 24 in the commercial class, again, given to the change in the requirement from EIA on the data centers and crypto customers to be included in the reporting for the commercial class, which is driving down the average cents per kWh. Next slide. Lastly, for industrial rates, OPPD stayed at 6.94 cents per kWh in 2024, but they moved to 13.2% below the regional average, which is up from 11.6% in 23, and they increased to 14.6% below the national average. Next slide. Moving on to fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. We conduct a cost of service study to align each customer class's rates with the actual cost drivers. Our rate setting process is reviewed by the rate consultant, which is the Brattle Group. We also want to highlight the changes that we've implemented based on Brattle's recommendations to ensure we remain consistent with industry best practices. These changes included eliminating the declining block structure. We consolidated rates 245 and 250, and we established demand limits for commercial and industrial rates. And then lastly, we are planning for the TVR pilot to begin in the spring of 2027, and that recommendation will be brought to the board in Q3 of this year. Next slide. For cost assignment across and within classes, this slide provides some context for the assignment recovery of costs based on the technology available. There's 3 components of rates. They are demand, energy, and customer costs. OPPD currently offers the 2-part rates for small commercial and residential customers to recover the demand costs, and then we do have 3-part rate structures for our industrial rates. Next slide. So the next 4 slides speak to monitoring affordability. We are now looking at cents per kWh and translating that into the average residential bill. The average residential bill remained relatively the same from 2023 to 2024, going from $109.67 to $109.32. We are showing at 8.9% below the regional average, which is up from 6.2% below in 2023. Next slide. This slide illustrates that our electricity burden, which is defined as the average electric bill as a percentage of annual income, continues to decrease. In 2024, the average electricity burden came in at 1.54%. On the right, we highlight the annual energy assistance funding. The availability of these programs plays a significant role in affordability and directly influences our customers' overall electric burden. It's important that we continue tracking energy assistance trends so we can stay proactive and responsive, ensuring that customers are connected with the resources they need to manage their electric bills. Next slide. These 2 maps provide a closer look at electricity burden at the zip code level. And so while our overall average electric burden is declining, individual customers may experience higher or lower burdens depending on factors such as zip code demographics, their heating source, and the efficiency of the home. The map on the left shows the percentage of customers who received 3 or more disconnect notices in 2024, indicating vulnerable customers. And the map on the right displays electricity burden by zip code, where blue areas indicate below average electric burdens and tan to dark orange areas represent higher than average electricity burdens. Next slide. And this is a new slide that we added this year to show additional detail on where energy assistance dollars are being distributed. In 2025, a total of 29,037 energy assistance payments were distributed. The map on the left shows each zip code share of the total energy assistance funding, with the darker orange areas representing zip codes receiving 12 to 15% of the total energy assistance dollars. The map on the right shows the percentage of customers within each zip code who received financial assistance. And so overall, this slide simply offers additional insight into where energy assistance funding is being directed. Next slide. This slide highlights some of the offerings, the customer offerings that we provide to our customers with riders and rate offerings. The flexibility will continue to expand as we move into the future with more advanced meter technology. Next slide. For the cost of energy when it's used, we charge our residential and small commercial customers seasonally through summer and non-summer energy charges. We also have the pass-through mechanism of the fuel and purchase power adjustment, our 261M market energy rate, and then also acknowledging that we are going to continue to evaluate more advanced rate structures with the capability of new technology through AMI. And then we remain committed to enhancing communication and transparency through the following efforts. We've implemented targeted outreach to customer segments. We've provided clear explanations of rate changes and their underlying drivers. We've engaged with customers to support understanding and address questions. And then we've also published the annual rate fundamentals report. And our objective is to ensure that our rate information is accessible and easy to understand while continuing to build and maintain trust within the community. Next slide. And so we do recommend that the board finds OPPD in compliance with SD2 rates. And with that, I will open it up for questions or comments.
I'll hop in real quick. I don't have any questions or comments, just noting that the Finance Committee did review the report independently. We aligned on the recommendations, so we're pretty comfortable with where we are and are looking forward to any discussion or questions that might exist.
Can you go back a couple slides to where you had the map on where the assistance was going? That slide. So the dark orange on the left edge, on the right on the map, is that Ashland? Where is that?
I am not sure.
That's the directional location of Ashland for sure. We can take a go-do, Director Hudson,
Yeah.
and get the exact zip code.
I'd be interested because that seems to be a strange outlier there. You know, the rest of that map makes sense, and I'm not sure whether that falls in my district or Director Core's. So I'd be interested on that. And can you go back one more slide? And then it's kind of also interesting, the electric burden by zip code. I'm surprised to see that in the very far upper left district. That's within my area, but yet it's not shown. It's not dark in that Ashland area there.
Right.
So I wonder if, and then we see on the bottom left, the second map, you have a very a dark orange zone too. So I don't know. There's some of those just kind of seem a little bit inconsistent. So, but I think it's a very informative maps in general.
Yeah, it's certainly meant to be illustrative of the whole service territory. I've got some notes here. We'll go back and we're happy to get you some of that information. I know there is some nuances in the rural counties relative to total customer count. And if a few customers receive aid or a few customers receive a disconnect, it tends to show on a percentage basis as pretty hyper acute. But we'll go back and get you some of that information. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
Brad, I would be able to offer that I just checked. Britton Gable is on the call and may be able to save us some follow-up. So Britton, if you're able to come off mute and if you have answers to Director Hudson's questions and would like to provide those now, then we can get those informed for the board's consideration of the SD.
Yeah. Good afternoon or good morning, Director Hudson. Britton Gable here, manager of Advocacy Solutions. So I just want to double down on the point that Brad had made. So in our rural counties, we have different concentrations on customers. There's some towns in which we serve that specific town. There's some zip codes where we serve the higher density of population. Some zip codes we don't, and we have only a few customers. So if we have one customer that had 3+ disconnect notices out of 10, it can really throw off the heat map. And or we have 2 out of 10 customers that are qualified for LIHEAP in that county. So that adds to the complexity of the heat map. So we'll see in our rural areas specifically to where we don't serve all the customers in that specific zip code, where it could be like Syracuse as an example. We don't directly provide the electricity in Syracuse as a residential customer perspective. So in that zip code, our rural customers show up. And so there's fewer customers that show up on this heat map than all reality that live there. So there's just some complexities of this. The intent of this to kind of give the overall view of our service territory and what's going on. And we monitor these trends on a routine basis to make sure we're connecting customers that are struggling, with their bill, with assistance options to help them.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yep.
Well, I had a question as well, and actually Director Hudson asked all of them, and that has followed up nicely with those. I can understand the nuances in the rural areas in particular. I do wonder how long have we had these maps? When did customers group first put these together for the board to look at, particularly the energy burden ones?
We added these to SD2 in 2021.
Okay.
That was right around the time that when we were looking at SD2 and monitor affordability indicators was added a few years prior to that. How could we provide more information? And so we worked with the customer team on providing these heat maps.
And if I may add a little bit of context, that's an excellent question. I remember back in 2017, 2018, there were a few revisions of SD2, and we used to talk about rates all the time, and we still talk about rates. But back then there was quite a bit of discussion and desire from the board to expand the discussion from rates to bills, right? Ultimately, it's the rate influences the bill, but how much are people paying, and then that evolved into how much are people paying compared to their disposable income. So it was an evolution. Really coming out of COVID, there was quite a bit of disruption with COVID payments and unemployment. So that really enhanced the need to present it this way. I'm very, very proud of what the team has done, because it truly gives us 2 or 3 layers of additional detail that go beyond the rate.
Thank you. Very helpful.
So I appreciate the fact that we have these maps available and that we have for several years. And as is indicated on the map, I think we can see that there are areas of disproportionately high energy burden, and visually I can identify 68104, 110, and 111 on the map. I would point out that this has been a persistent area. This is the delivery of energy assistance funding, but the other map of energy burden, I think the previous map, it shows a similar concentration visually of color. There we go. But I guess my question then would be, there is a correlation between the disproportionately high energy burden and the delivery of energy assistance, which I'm glad to see. And looking forward, do we anticipate that these maps will change at some point? Essentially, is the action we are taking and the delivery of energy assistance having the desired impact of reducing disproportionately high energy burden in particular areas across our service territory? Or are there other things we can or should do in either the design of the language within SD2 or within the design of rates to try and achieve some of those outcomes?
Tim, I have some thoughts, but welcome your voice as you stay connected with the customer.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. I'll chime in and then let you tag on to there. Director Williams, thank you for the question. There's a few, I might share a couple of other nuances around what we see is the reality behind this. So the portrayal here of the distribution of energy assistance dollars and energy burden, I think an important nuance there is, and I don't have this statistically, but we do certainly see differences in the ratio of utilization of programs compared to the eligibility of programs throughout the service territory. Meaning we have certainly parts of the service territory that there's a much higher percentage of folks that are eligible for energy assistance that take advantage of that than in other parts of the service territory. So that is an important, in particular, when we think about overlaying energy burden visualization with energy assistance distribution, that is a key factor that makes that comparison directional at best, probably. Beyond that, what I would share is we continue to, what the high level map also maybe doesn't fully portray is the length at which we go when we work with customers that are having difficulty paying their bill, whether habitually or individually, the links that we go to explore every option of assistance available, up to and including, while we don't speak for other nonprofits or other assistance groups, we do work very collaboratively and can sometimes provide suggestions to customers that are maybe struggling or through their interaction with us indicate that they're struggling with things beyond their electric bill. Beyond that, we continue to look at programs, tweaks, and enhancements. We continue to work to make sure we capture every available dollar of LIHEAP, for example, through federal government administered through the state. So there's a number of things we continue to do there to make sure that we can provide as much assistance as possible to those who need that most help. Brad, what would you add?
No, I think you addressed it well, Tim. Thank you, sir.
If I can follow up, I think within the last year during our legislative updates, we discussed a bill that was introduced that would authorize additional opportunities in rate making to try and address some of the concerns that we're discussing here. Any comment about that looking forward? Is that a strategy that might help to achieve some of the desired outcomes?
I can speak for that. The answer is yes. I think what I read into the question you asked originally, it's okay, we have these maps. Great. What are we doing with it? Right. And I think Tim gave a good overview of, well, it's helping us be more surgical into the types of programs and assistance that we're putting in there. But I think to be very clear, it's the bulk of the assistance dollars that we get into the district that we can deploy to address affordability, they're coming from the federal government. It's LIHEAP. It's federal dollars that we receive, and then we cheer every time we get them because we can then put them to work. To your most recent question is, what else can we do? Well, all of this requires resources. Today, we are very limited in the way, or the board is very limited in the way you can design rates based on income qualifications. That is something that we don't have in the state of Nebraska, and it's something that I am very passionate about and I've talked to my team about how do we continue to work with the legislature. There was a bill introduced last year. It did not advance, but it was a bill that was aimed at giving board members more options for you to decide. It wouldn't direct you to have low income rates, for example, but it would open up the door. So then, staying true to local control, each board member of each utility can decide, now you have another tool to direct funds to help with affordability issues. That will be part of our strategy. I cannot predict the outcome, but I see this as an incredibly important tool. If I have 30 more seconds, I'll say the need for infrastructure is not going away. We have aging infrastructure. We need new infrastructure. We need more wires, poles, generators, solar panels, and wind blades, everything. The pressure on rates is not likely to go away anytime soon. So it is important for board members to be able to still approve the resources necessary to continue to build what we need, what the community needs, and at the same time have the right tools to address those who can least afford the electric bill. And I think this legislation would help board members do the latter, so that you can continue to invest in the infrastructure that Nebraska sorely needs. So those are my thoughts.
Yep, thank you for those responses. And as I mentioned, I am particularly attuned at identifying zip codes in my district. But to Tim's point, I think we have identified in the past that we know there is disproportionately high energy burden across our service territory. And I think we know that is also true across the rest of the state of Nebraska. And so this is not a problem that is isolated to more urban areas. There is significant suburban and rural energy burden as well. And so availability of rate-making structures to address that across all jurisdictions or all areas within our service territory and across all of the state of Nebraska would be very helpful. And I guess I would just say I am also extremely supportive of that type of enabling legislation so that we can address this problem in ways that help to get to the underlying underlying challenges that we know will continue going forward. So thank you for the responses. Thank you for that. Look forward, Javier. I appreciate that. And it's something that is going to continue to be very important to me in future reporting. Thanks.
I see Director Hudson has his hand up also, but I'll just jump in just with a quick comment. I recently had an opportunity to speak to a variety of nonprofit leaders in the Omaha metropolitan area, and Family Housing Advisory Services, in her introduction to me, said that they have worked closely with OPPD in helping new home buyers and homeowners learn how to make the most of their money and not get behind on the bills. And I think there are other nonprofits who have done that as well. So thank you very much for that that effort for everybody who does that. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I can't see Director Hudson. If his hand is still up, I don't know if he had a question. If not, I did have an additional question.
Okay. No question for me.
Thank you. On a previous slide, we talked about the principles of rate making and the cost of service study, and I appreciate that additional detail from Beth that she always provides to us. In past meetings, we have also discussed the fact that our customer classes are residential, commercial, and industrial, but that there is a particular type of growth in economic activity within the industrial class, specifically very large customers, to put a finer point on it, data centers in particular. And we have talked about additional modifications or additional investigation into our rate structures and the way we present information going forward. So I'm not expecting anything different in this report now, but I guess, do we anticipate any different type of reporting in future SD2 monitoring reports based on the possibility of identifying something like a fourth class of customer that receives service in a way that is substantially different from our traditional industrial customers? Something like high voltage transmission interconnected customers as a way to identify who those customers might be. I don't know if this is a question for staff or if this is a question for the Finance Committee, because again, we have talked about this in past meetings and we have outlined a path going forward. So if this is perhaps Brad or if this is perhaps Director Moody, I'd be glad to hear what we anticipate in the clarification of data about that increasingly large sub portion of the industrial sector. Thanks.
I'll start, and then Brad and Tim, I know you've been involved as well. Chime in, please, and fill in the gaps. Director Williams, good question. As you noted, we've been working through, and as recently as our most recent pre-committee meetings, we are in the process of educating ourselves on what is happening in the hyperscaler sector. So that will continue. There's more work to be done there. Thereafter, as you pointed out, one of the kind of essential questions that exists that the Finance Committee is taking ownership of is, does a separate new rate class make sense? That's the end, right? Like, I don't want to put clarity around it because we're still in the process of trying to figure that out. As part of that, we will be coming to the public later this year with kind of some high-level observations for what it is that we've learned and examined and starting to understand. I wouldn't expect, but I don't know that we will have an answer to the, does a new rate class make sense? But we're working our way towards trying to make that determination. I would imagine once we get to that point, that will help us understand, does that necessitate any changes to SD2? And if so, what is the reporting requirements there? So I think it's a really, really good question. And I think it's sort of a second order question that will follow some of the education and then deliberation, discussion, and determination as to whether or not a new rate class makes sense. That's my take. I could be wrong. Again, Brad, Tim, fill in if I missed anything, please.
Yeah, thanks. I would just, affirm your clear characterization in progress. And I think as the question was raised from the board to management on does a separate customer class need to be evaluated, it affirmed some things we were doing relative to cost allocation and the fidelity of our cost allocation. And as we started the discussions, it also allowed some staff members to come in with here's some different things we continue to see kind of around the country, and where's the nexus between the options that are available and the state law, and how do we advance the conversation within those spaces. And so I'm just excited to continue that work with Director Moody and bring something back when we think it's shaped enough for the board to be able to react to that.
Thank you both. Nothing to add from me.
If I may, I think that's an excellent question. I will also talk about sense of urgency, right? This is a topic that's, virtually every time I'm in a public space, people ask about data center rates. And I'm very pleased with the work that's happening in the Finance Committee. Thank you, Director Moody, for your leadership there. I also want to remind the members of the public that we have a rate that is that high voltage transmission interconnection rate. That's rate 261. And I want to brag a little bit about this because OPPD, and I'm going to give credit to Mr. Underwood, who's now our CFO, but back then he was in rates. We designed that rate back in 2016, 2017. That is the rate that, in my mind today, is giving us a very clear view into cost allocation for these very large customers who are today data centers, most of them, if not all of them. And so there is always a need to do the work that Director Moody and Brad Underwood just discussed. But I also want to relate to the public that we have a rate today that is already doing a lot of that work, whereas other utilities don't have that. And you hear a lot more sense of urgency to, hey, let's come up with a rate that addresses these. We have a rate today that addresses a lot of these costs, and we will look into that and figure out, should we modify it? How can we enhance it? And perhaps even call it a data center rate or do a reclassification of customers based on that rate. But I didn't want to overlook the fact that we have that rate. And Director Williams, you talked about that high voltage transmission rate, and I wanted to mention that here.
Appreciate the clarification from everyone and the outline of what we should anticipate going forward. I want to be clear that my interest is mostly in helping board members and the public understand what we do in our cost of service study, specifically in that allocation, and that, again, things that are in the industrial category seem to be differentiating. And so I'm not looking to use this as a method of disproportionately impacting any customers, which would be counter to rate-making policy and state law. But I do think it's important that we have clarity on the costs that are in different areas so that when people ask us, Javier, as you indicated in public meetings, how are data centers impacting the financial position of OPPD? We have sufficient data to clarify, here is what we understand about the costs and the revenues and the broad impacts of different types of economic development and activity on the utility. So my desire is mostly to be able to answer those questions in more clarity to people who have increasing numbers of questions to us, not to disproportionately use that to change anything in counter to the fundamentals of rate-making policy. So I appreciate the desire to have more information so that we can make appropriate decisions, and that when we review monitoring reports, we have the best available information to understand whether or not we are meeting the objectives that people have sent us here to achieve on the board. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Underwood, you want to finish off here with reflections?
Yeah, great. Well, I don't know if there's other thoughts from the board, but one of the things we've been working on with the chair of the finance is around the competitiveness group that we're compared to. And so I don't want to transition us prematurely, but there is a revision proposed to alter the SD based on a change I think the board would like to make, or at least the finance committee would like to recommend. So I'll yield for any other thoughts. Otherwise, we can transition to the next item.
So thank you for naming that, Brad. Let's not transition too quickly. Let's stop and just sort of acknowledge and honor the fact that we are exceeding the primary metric here. And the district has done a really exceptional job of controlling costs, delivering reliable service very efficiently, which allows our ratepayers to benefit and have, some discretionary income that they can do other things with, which is really, really important at a time when people are very much feeling the challenges of inflationary costs. So I just wanted to offer that acknowledgement, right? Like, we've had a good conversation, but the reality is we're well below the regional and national numbers, and that's a very meaningful and important accomplishment on the part of the entire district.
Well, not hearing anything else, I want to
have one reflection.
Sorry.
And this is on strategic implications. I really, really appreciated the dialogue with Director Williams on legislation, because it really allows us to pause and step back and look at the big picture, right? This strategic directive clearly talks about rates and affordability, but we have 14 other strategic directives that oftentimes are at odds with each other. And to me, the conversation around the necessary investments that the utility has to make for the benefit of the community, it's incredibly important. And at the same time, having this strategic dialogue to say, okay, there are many ways that we can address affordability. One of them is just cut spending for all of us, but that has negative consequences in the long term. And so having these conversations to say, okay, how do we continue to enable the growth of the district, the reinforcement of infrastructure, the attraction of good talent, and at the same time address affordability by zip code, and try to figure out how do we all improve. To me, this is the best conversation we could have, and I just want to call that out here, that strategic implications of the tools that we are planning to put forward for the legislature is very, very important in order for us to really do what we need to do, which is provide affordable service at the same time as we're providing a reliable and resilient service. So for what it's worth, I'm repeating myself, but I think that this dialogue to me this SD is giving us that space to have this conversation, which is strategic in nature.
And if I was not clear on the last slide about the monitoring report that we've seen, yes, I agree that we have met and exceeded the metrics that we have set for the organization, and we are seeing excellent performance in the area of rates, specifically leading toward affordability. So I'm very glad to see that. In terms of reflections here, I did want to highlight that in the systems committee, I have on numerous occasions mentioned an interest in the idea of utilization of our system. And I wanted to flag it because my interest in utilization and the possibility for modifications in other policy to elevate data about utilization is mostly because increased utilization of existing assets is the best way to cost recover and help to reduce future cost pressure. And we've talked about this in systems, but I wanted to tie it back to rates because we have looked at utilization in the customer classes. And the reason that I am so interested is because there is, in my opinion, availability of additional cost recovery on fixed assets to help us reduce or to avoid future upward pressure on rates from recovery on those existing assets. And I'll be more specific. In the residential area, I see a lot of potential benefits there. So I know that is an adjacent topic, but the reflections slide about strategic implications feels like the appropriate place to tie the systems discussion on utilization to the potential benefits in rate making that we have just discussed in this monitoring report. And I look forward to additional conversations in that direction in the future. Thanks.
Just one final comment. I was struck by, I forget if it was Tim or Britton's comment, that the most energy burdened people sometimes do not know about the resources for assistance that they have access to. And I just want to call out the don't have the right name, community resource fairs or events. I've been to, let's see, at least 2, maybe 3 of them. And the fact that we have people there from OPPD to help people on the spot. MUD does the same thing, and the number of nonprofits that are also in attendance and can provide such a diverse range of services and assistance is really impressive. So I just want to compliment the team on executing that. I know that it costs money to do that, but that is indeed an investment in our community in that way. I noticed that one is coming up for our more rural area in the fall. So that'll be more data points to see if that can't help some of those folks out in those areas. So thank you.
Thank you for acknowledging that, Director Spurgeon. The team works very hard at those events.
Any other comments, Director Moody?
No.
All right.
No.
Go for it.
No, I was just gonna. I'll tee this up, Brad. As you all recall, last month the Finance Committee brought some recommendations for revisions to SD2. In doing so, we as a board felt quite comfortable with the direction we were headed, and so generally speaking, when it comes to refinements to our policies, once the board is aligned, we pause and we say, okay, let's send this to the public for comment. Then the Finance Committee gets back together, reviews what we've heard from the public, and makes a determination as to whether or not additional deliberation by the board and the committee is necessary, or if it's ready for us to take to Thursday's board meeting for action. As of the Finance Committee meeting, I believe June 5th, whatever the date was, there were no public comments received. So the Finance Committee pretty quickly said, okay, seems like we're good here. Let's bring this back to the all committee meeting for one last pit stop before we bring it to the finish line on Thursday. So that's why we're here today. Teed up, Brad, back to you.
Yeah, I'll do a quick yield back to Ms. Hoyle to characterize the proposed changes. So thank you, sir. Thank you, Beth.
Okay, no problem. Aaron, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So continuing from last month's review of the region and the directional target within SD2, in 2022, we updated SD2 from the West North Central region to the North Central region and changed the percentage from 20% to 10%. The focus of our conversations have been around that directional target of 10% below the average published rates of those 7 states in the North Central region. And those states are Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and South Dakota. Next slide. And we reviewed how OPPD compares nationally with the North Central region and the West North Central region. This comparison is what prompted us to pause when we first saw the 2025 preliminary results. Within the North Central region, OPPD's competitiveness actually improved with the 6.3% rate increase we had in 2025. And we questioned, is that providing the right signal around OPPD's rate increases? Last month, I walked through the characteristics of both the East North Central and the West North Central regions. We also reviewed more detailed information for Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, and North Dakota, including retail rate or retail sales, grid operators, RTO participation, major generation types, and ownership structures. Next slide. And after considering all of that data, our recommendation is to return to comparing OPPD to the West North Central region and keeping the target at 10% below. Next slide. And this change was posted on OPPD Community Connect since the May All Committee meeting, and in that time frame, since the Finance Committee meeting a couple weeks ago, We did receive one comment that was posted on OPPD Community Connect, and one comment was made on social media. Both comments were not on the change to move to the West North Central region, but more on concern around residential rates in general. So Aaron, if you could return to the previous slide, I'll hand it back over to Director Moody.
Thanks, Beth, and thanks for flagging those new comments. Much appreciated. Colleagues, I'll speak for myself. I don't know that we've heard anything meaningful enough from the public for us to step back and revisit. So I would recommend we continue forward, bring this for approval on Thursday, but I'm open to any discussion around that.
I support bringing it forward for Thursday.
Okay. Great.
If I may, I will just say that I think I was responsible for the encouraging the adoption of Illinois and those states in 2022, and did it on the basis of weather, similar latitude and kind of thing. But I was persuaded by reasonable arguments that two of those states in that region are very different utilities. They have very different utility and statewide structure, which makes it hard for us for them to be good benchmarks for our competition. So I was persuaded by that. I understand it. So I'm happy to have the revision move forward. Thank you.
Okay. I think we're good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Director Moody. On to Mr. Foch, please.
Good morning. I will just hand it right over to Mr. Laskowski, who's Director of Risk Management and Innovation, to walk through SD15 Enterprise Risk Management Monitoring Report. Dan?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Good morning. We'll run through the SD15 monitoring report. This first slide is just the direct language from the SD, ultimately indicating the board's desire to have the district contain an enterprise risk management program where we assess and review all the risks of the organization and identify those and escalate those to the executive team and the board that are most significant, and allow them to then ask questions and ensure that they have a good understanding of those risks as they then make other risk-informed decisions. Next slide. This slide really represents how our ERM structure works at the district. The top half of the slide really illustrates the existing board of directors standing committees. The ones at the bottom are kind of mirroring enterprise risk management working group committees that are comprised of at least one representative from every business unit to ensure we take an enterprise view of all of our risks. Working with the chairs of those groups and then myself and my analyst, Matt Cole. They meet monthly. They review risks in detail with risk owners presenting on those updates. Those updates are challenged by the committee members to ensure we're looking at the impacts and the likelihood of the risk across all of the different dimensions that are important to OPPD. And ultimately, those groups then vote on those risks per our enterprise risk matrix. And then those decisions are brought up to our executive ERM committee on a quarterly basis, and then the board risk committee on a quarterly basis. Next slide. So really just putting in text what I just mentioned. So those 4 ERM working group committees do meet on a monthly basis. And then those decisions coming out of those committees are elevated to our executive team and our board risk committee to ensure that risks are to a reasonable extent identified, that significant risks are understood, and that the mitigation strategies for those significant risks are understood, appropriate, and sufficient. Next slide. So this just lists the quarterly meetings that we had with the board risk committee through the last year, and then the additional topics of discussion on 3 of the 4 quarters. And then in the bottom right-hand corner is a small image of our overall risk dashboard that I know many of you have seen before. And then next slide. This just dives into a bit more detail on how we handle risk ownership, really having 3 levels. Ultimately, all risks are owned at the executive level, and those executives set the strategy for those risks and then work in collaboration with the director. Oh, sorry, go back one. With the director, who's our risk owner, who provides oversight for the risk, designs and implements mitigation strategies, works with their team of subject matter experts. That 3rd level, who perform the technical risk analysis and risk indicator monitoring, and then all 3 levels working in conjunction to ensure that risks are well understood, well presented to the committees, and then well vetted by those committees to make sure that we're making the best decisions on how those risks impact the district, and then send those signals to leadership and to other connected processes. Next slide. And then, and on that as needed basis, where the ERM program is not just a standalone function, it is incorporated in a lot of different functions and processes throughout the district. We've created the new strategic risk dashboard as a better way to visualize all of our risks across 10 different strategic risks that have all 50 of our enterprise risks. We also leverage our enterprise risk management information in our strategic planning process, and I was directly involved when ELT went through that process earlier this year on our resource planning and capital project prioritization. I'm a voting member on the RPC, so as the district is deciding on which projects get funded and which ones we cannot fund given limited resources, there's a risk component in that decision making, and that those projects that are intended to mitigate the most significant risks get prioritized information or prioritized outcomes in that process, so that the most important risks are getting resources before the least important risks.
Hey, Dan,
We've also,
sorry to interrupt you. It's RPC is the Resource Planning Committee. That's the committee that we use internally to approve capital projects. Just for the members of the public that may not be familiar with the acronym.
Oh, thank you, Javier. Also supported in conjunction with Beth Hoyle and her team, a redesign of how we categorize different work projects that are being brought through that resource prioritization process, and ensure that the risk benefit is being considered more intently, and that any risks for projects that we would not be able to fund, that we understand the risk of not funding those projects as clearly as possible to support better risk-informed decision-making at that level, which ultimately goes to executives and then forms the corporate operating plan that the board reviews at the end of every year. And then I could have picked from several different resolutions that the board has made in the last year. There are just obviously a couple here that I want to illustrate that are directly tied to risk trade-offs and risk decisions. Next slide. So ultimately, we're recommending that the board find us sufficiently in compliance with SD 15. And just some highlights: we've reviewed all of our enterprise risks, as is really our goal, through 2025, and we're on schedule to do so in 2026. Those most significant enterprise risks were reviewed with the executive team and the board risk committee quarterly. We continually train new risk owners and new leaders at the district to ensure that they understand how the ERM program works, their role, their accountabilities, to continue to move the risk culture of the organization forward. And we're incorporating it into new processes like our, the resource prioritization process, strategic planning, other business unit planning processes as well. And we are seen as a leader in the public power industry. I'm currently the chair of the Large Public Power Council ERM network. I'm also on the planning council for the APPA risk and insurance track for their business and finance conference. And that's less a reflection of me, that's more a reflection on the strength of the district's program. It takes the entire orchestra of subject matter experts, risk owners, committee members, executive leaders owning their risks and being and directly involved in the program, and ultimately the board risk committee. So it makes me proud to represent the strength of that program within the industry. And then the final slide is just any questions or comments.
Thank you, Dan. I definitely want to just give the district kudos for making risk very much part of our daily conversations around both the work that the district does, but then also how the board of directors executes our role. I think, certainly over the last year and a half, we have also elevated and changed the way that we are incorporating risk by having a new committee, the risk committee that I chair. But through that work, Dan, you and your team have brought forward a dashboard that not only looks at the highest level of risks for the board, but also gives us a depth to understand different risk buckets and the various things that are coming forward through that. So I very much want to recognize and appreciate the work that you and your team are doing that way, because it's allowing us to have a very robust framework to work within and navigate tricky topics. So with that, the risk committee is recommending we found the district sufficiently in compliance with this board policy. I welcome questions from my fellow board members. All right, hearing none, we're going to move this to take action on Thursday. And the next slide is reflections on what's been accomplished, challenges, strategic implications. Javier, I'd welcome for you to chime in here, and then we'll take board comment.
Thank you, Director Bogner. Well, first of all, I think that the SD as written is providing enormous value. I really don't have any suggestions for changes. What I really appreciate is what you just mentioned a few minutes ago, the space that the risk committee has provided for us to have robust discussions. And so I often describe my job and the job of OPPD as very much a risk management job. Right? We're managing risks all over the spectrum, from reliability, outages, customer service, cybersecurity, and so having this function as robust as it is today is incredibly important. And Dan Laskowski, you started this journey over 10 years ago, and we really didn't have much of a structure, and so it's been fantastic to see how it's evolved, and it will continue to evolve. So again, the strategic choices that we make at the management level and then eventually the board level have to be informed by a very solid, robust risk framework. And I believe we have that today. It will always be challenged, and we can always improve it, but I feel very blessed to have that risk framework that really allows us to make hard decisions, because many times we don't have all the information we would like available, but yet we have to make decisions. And I think this is a good framework for us to do that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Wonderful. Board, anything that we should reflect on to potentially make revisions to this SD or the like? All right, we can move on. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Director Bogner. We're keeping with Mr. Foch for the severance agreement.
Yes, good morning again. And I am filling in for Vice President Wheeler, and this is just a reporting item. It's our obligation to report severance agreements to the board for your awareness. And there are the 7 additional employees that you see have been separated from OPPD as a result of the Fort Calhoun Station decommissioning program, and that's what you see below you. I just want to pause and commend all of the employees at Fort Calhoun Station who've done such an amazing job throughout this decommissioning process. And as we begin to step towards the end of the process, kind of in this final phasing, you'll be seeing a few more of these. These are employees who've stayed, making sure that all of the responsibilities for responsible, efficient, and effective decommissioning have been effectuated. And so our kudos to all of them, and just wanted to report as per our obligation.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the board? Any comments?
Just to hop on this, I have I continue to be astonished at the work of the decommissioning of Fort Calhoun. And these individuals stayed until the work was done. And their expertise, their history with the place, their depth of knowledge of what had gone before, I cannot help, excuse me, I can't help but think that that has contributed to the relatively smooth operation of decommissioning. And so very much appreciative of all of their work. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Foch. I think we can move on to Mr. Fisher, please.
Yes, well, good morning. Today I'm providing a required report on the settlement of a tort claim exceeding $50,000. This is where a View on State filed a claim with the district related to an incident that occurred on February 14th, 2026, involving some damage to their business located at 13467 State Street here in Omaha. Their claimed damages totaled just over $69,000. And so under Nebraska state statute, any settlement above $50,000 must be reported to the board of directors. In this case, the district and the View on State have reached a settlement in the amount of $67,000. Again, this update is provided simply for reporting purposes in accordance with our statutory requirements.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? All right. Thanks, Mr. Fisher.
All right. Thank you.
With that, we have break. I was going to see if we could move up a little bit. Let's come back at 10 till, unless anybody has objections to that. I don't think I see any objections. So we'll reconvene at 11:50. Thank you all. Aaron, are you ready to go?
Yes.
And then Mr. Underwood, do you need a minute, or you? I saw you on there, but just want to make sure you're ready to go.
I am ready, sir.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Well, please go ahead with the ISP update, please.
Okay, great. We've got an update on our integrated system plan, which historically has been called an integrated resource plan. We've got a few slides here, 10 or 11, to really walk us through the status of where we're at in the process, as well as the most recent community outreach that we've done and some of the participation statistics from that. So having said that, I'll turn it over to Shannon Coleman. She's the Director of Energy Portfolio Planning. Shannon, would you take it away?
Great. Good morning. Shannon Coleman, Director of Energy Portfolio Planning. And as Brad said, as we continue in this multi-year integrated system plan effort, we'll continue returning to the board each quarter to report on the work to date, previous stakeholder engagement, and expectations for the coming quarter. So by now, everyone's likely familiar with the ISP, and I'm sure a lot of those on the meeting today have attended our previous workshops. But for alignment, I'll start with a very high-level conceptual view. The 2026 ISP is the next iteration in our 5-year cycle of plans intended to guide the organization in the optimization of our resource portfolio in an intentional way to maintain the goals of affordability, reliability, and environmental sensitivity. Our previous plans have all been integrated resource plans, which focused solely on the determination of how to expand our generation to serve the district's needs into the future. In that structure, the generation, transmission, and distribution systems were planned independently, and each was forced to be reactionary to changes in the rest of the system. In this cycle, we're transitioning to an integrated system plan, which looks at all the components of the system together: generation, transmission, distribution, and customer solutions, and attempts to co-optimize the future state of each and the entire system as a whole. The outcome of the ISP will be an action plan that closely looks at the next 10 years and recommends the best way to expand the system during that time frame with no regrets actions that consider not only the most probable futures, but some possible and impactful futures to ensure a system that can respond to a variety of conditions while minimizing risk to the district. And as dictated by the board resolution in December, the ISP will study the system in terms of grid support and determine the best way to maintain the grid support currently provided by the North Omaha station to enable the conversion and retirement of those units. There are some limitations to what the ISP aims to deliver. The ISP is not a step-by-step dictation of what we have to do in future years with exact megawatts and technologies and years and locations for either supply side or demand side resources. There will likely be board resolutions informed by the ISP results that eventually arrive at that type of detail, but the ISP itself is directional in nature and provides structure around what the future of the system should look like. Next slide. Stakeholder engagement is a very important part of the ISP process, and Brooke will speak to in more detail later on in the presentation. The ISP is intended to be a publicly facing activity as much as possible and is intended to educate the public on system planning in general, the trade-offs we have to consider when planning, what solutions we evaluate, the criteria we utilize in the evaluation, and what futures we want to contemplate for selecting optimal portfolios. The intent is to present the pieces of the process as we go. And we've structured this into 4 public workshops that proceed our project so we can gather input for inclusion at each next step. We've conducted already 2 of the 4 workshops. The first was held on March 24th and provided an introduction of integrated system planning and an overview of the process to come. We also prompted participants to anticipate the parts of the process where we would be soliciting feedback and asking for input. Workshop 2 was held on May 14th and included a deeper dive into the data inputs to be utilized in the system modeling. We talked about what the modeling would look like, the resource technologies to be modeled as potential future additions to the portfolio, the costs of different resource types relative to one another, the availability of resource types in years out into the future, possible future conditions of our existing resources, SPP market interactions, and the variables used to define the modeling scenarios. A recording of each of the workshops, as well as the materials presented at the workshops, are available online at the dedicated ISP page on the OCC website. In this way, interested members of the public can review the material and can also catch up on any sessions they might have missed so they can join in at any point of the process. For OPPD employees, we have also conducted separate internal workshop sessions using the same material. We still have 2 workshops to come that will walk through the rest of the process. Workshop 3 will present the initial results of the capacity expansion and reliability modeling, as well as some of the production cost projections and risk analysis. And then we'll wrap up with workshop 4 for the final modeling results. After the workshops, we'll post the final report for public comment, and then the report will be submitted to the Western Area Power Administration as required by the December 31st due date. Next slide. In the coming slides, now we'll review some of the material from workshop 2, starting with the modeling framework. So when we talk about modeling, both the existing system and modeling future system expansion, the most basic and the most constraining parameter is the regulatory framework that the utility operates in. OPPD is subject to regulations at the federal, regional, state, and local level. First, there are multiple regulatory bodies at the federal level that regulate the reliability of the bulk power grid, the operation of the wholesale energy markets, and ensure environmental protections. The next very important control exists at the regional level. OPPD is a member of the Southwest Power Pool, or SPP, the regional transmission organization that administers the wholesale energy market. As part of this authority, SPP dictates regional resource adequacy and grid reliability requirements and oversees grid interconnection requests for resources and large loads. A lot of the constraints and the policy requirements that we discuss on a regular basis are those put in place by SPP. At the state level, we all know that Nebraska is the only 100% public power state in the country, and as such, there are various state statutes that dictate retail service areas jurisdiction, our obligation to serve within those service area boundaries, and allocate certain approval requirements for new generation and transmission expansion to the Power Review Board. And then lastly, at the local level, you as our publicly elected board of directors govern our rates and set strategic direction for the utility. The 15 established strategic directives guide not only how we accomplish our mission on a daily and long-term basis, but also very specifically act as clear and consistent input from the board throughout the ISP study process. In fact, we've built the study methodology to incorporate those strategic directives as criteria within the modeling framework itself. On the next slide, you can see here the structure of that modeling framework, and this was explained and discussed within workshop 2. For the ISP, OPPD is partnering with E3, a leading energy consultant that has really pioneered the concept and the construct of the integrated system plan. E3 supported our last IRP 5 years ago with the Pathways to Decarbonization study and is really adding value in this iteration as one of the very few energy consultants with experience in conducting integrated system plans. E3 has led the development of this study framework and will perform the very complex reliability and capacity expansion modeling. The middle section of the slide here illustrates the multiple modeling platforms that will be utilized in the ISP. Each of these platforms is considered best in class and serves as an industry standard. And each individual model is a complex process with hundreds of thousands of calculations. Integrating them all together allows the co-optimization of generation, transmission, and distribution, and allows us to model with multiple strategic directives in mind. Some of the platforms that you see on this slide here focus on generation, such as Plexos for capacity expansion and Recap for reliability model. Others focus on the grid, like PSSE for transmission modeling and LoadSeer for the modeling of distribution and customer solutions. There is no single commercially available modeling software platform that does this type of comprehensive integration and optimization today. So this combination allows a simulation of integrated modeling for planning purposes. One important detail to point out on this slide to show the progress that we're aiming for in conducting an ISP instead of an IRP is that everywhere on the slide that you see the orange wording with an asterisk means that that content has been significantly enhanced or is new as we transition from the previous IRPs to the new ISP framework. In workshop 2, we really focused on the list that you see on the left, the key inputs to the model, the peak demand forecast, characteristics of our existing generation, the new supply side and demand side technology options that we want to offer to the model, as well as the costs of those resource options, the capacity of the grid to accommodate load growth and generation build, varying decarbonization scenarios, and the overarching policy constraints that dictate how we solve for resource adequacy and grid capability. The integration of these modeling platforms is designed to develop a series of outputs that you see over on the right that will provide directional generation and grid expansion portfolios that optimize those objectives of reliability, affordability, and environmental sensitivity. And as mentioned earlier, these outputs will be the focus of our next 2 workshops. On the next slide, lastly, in workshop 2, we talked over several of the model inputs, but today we'll review just a couple of the input categories from the workshop and 2 of the areas where we invited customers to bring feedback and share their perspectives. So first, we presented the list of candidate resources to be entered into the capacity expansion model for selection in the future optimized portfolio. The resources are shown, and I know we've seen this slide before at the board level. The resources shown here in this way to acknowledge and communicate trade-offs that are inherent with every resource that will be available to the model. This table is just an illustration of the relative value of resource options according to how they achieve the various criteria which are listed across the top of the table. The variation in the table for each resource shows there's no perfect resource, and there's a need for resource diversity to accumulate all of the needed components in the portfolio as a whole. And again, I know we've mentioned this before, but in the table, green represents a relative benefit, red represents a relative challenge, and yellow means either that the relative value falls in the middle of the range or that the value changes under different circumstances. The model will look at the future needs of the program, of the system, and be able to develop the capabilities to meet those needs using both the supply side options that are listed here at the top of the list, anything from coal and gas to wind, solar, and storage, as well as the demand side options that are shown at the bottom of the list, energy efficiency, demand response, and distributed generation. The goal here is to inform the model with the details of each type of resource and allow the needs of the system to determine which resource types are the most valuable to build into the portfolio in the future. So the message of the workshop discussion here was not to dial into any individual characteristic or any particular resource, but rather to recognize that the model will consider a variety of resources and that each has relative challenges and benefits. These will all be measured and evaluated, allowing the model to select resources objectively. The trade-off between these needed characteristics is why we continue to expand our portfolio in several directions, utilizing several types of resources. During and following the workshop, we did receive some clarifying questions on specific resources and resource configurations and their inclusion in the model. We do appreciate the engagement and the public interest in ensuring a wide range of options and maintaining a posture open to new development, but still responsive to risk aversion. On the next slide, we also invited the workshop participants to think about the future conditions we need to include in the model. When building the model, there are several assumptions that have to be made, but we know that each set of assumptions reflects only one possible future out of almost infinite possibilities and probabilities. Modeling only one future scenario and building a portfolio around those results increases our risk exposure. So instead, we want to model a variety of conditions that we consider to be probable or impactful. We define these future states as a combination of variables to look at outcomes within a range of possible futures. There are three main categories of these scenario defining variables or drivers that E3 reviewed in workshop 2. And we presented participants with corresponding questions that you see here on this slide to kind of shape their thoughts around the scenarios. So first, scenario drivers can be defined by internal or external policy. We could foresee OPPD strategies that focus on least cost alone and strategies that maintain various paths to decarbonization. So in terms of strategies, what are the trade-offs and impacts of various trajectories to decarbonization and achieving our net zero 2050 goal as directed by the board? And likewise, what are the external policies and strategies that we might see imposed on us as a utility that will impact our planning? Other scenario drivers relate to customer demand, which you see in the middle box. Future load growth has a wide potential range, and that range is very impactful to how the system is expanded and optimized. Faced with unprecedented levels of future demand requests, how does load growth at different rates impact the magnitude, the timing, and the technologies of the resources added to our portfolio in the future? What do we actually expect in terms of load growth? What level of growth do we plan to? And how do we approach the risk of unknown load growth? And then the last primary driver discussed was resource technologies. We can consider a strategy that leans into bringing emerging technologies online versus a risk-averse strategy that continues to focus on mature technologies alone, or even a scenario that focuses on extending the life of existing assets. How does the maturity, availability, and cost of constructing and operating a given technology impact the resulting reliability and affordability of the system to our customer owners? Where do we want to focus our investments? Mature technologies, emerging technologies, or existing assets? And how can we best leverage those investments to maximize value and minimize risk? So the drivers listed here were presented in the workshop to encourage customers to provide feedback on the variables that should be used and ideas to help create these likely and impactful future states. These questions provide guidelines for selection and calibration of the variables used to define the modeling scenarios. We asked participants' thoughts on these drivers, as well as ideas for additional factors that we should consider in addition. On the next slide, using these three scenario driver categories and then defining discrete points within each category, E3 created a matrix from which to create our scenarios. For the emissions target, the reference scenario will include no target to allow us to capture the incremental cost of decarbonization. Other scenarios will select a straight line trajectory to net zero or a moderated decarbonization pace. Next, to explore the questions around load growth, scenarios will be assigned a moderate growth, high growth, or low growth peak load projection. And then lastly, in consideration of the availability of technologies, we'll define scenarios that have only mature technologies available for selection, scenarios that add nuclear resources, and scenarios that make all mature and emerging resource technologies selectable by the model. On the next slide then, combining the options for emissions targets, load forecasts, and technology availability scenario drivers into logically defined futures, combining all of those together, we arrive at this list of proposed modeling scenarios. I won't walk through each of the scenarios, but they're listed here as they were presented in workshop 2, and participants were asked to provide feedback on the included scenarios and plausible scenarios we may have excluded. We actually did not receive any comments related to modeling scenarios, but maybe that's a positive sign. You'll note on the very bottom of the slide that we'll also conduct a number of sensitivities to quantify the risk of variation in fuel costs, variation in technology costs, and also changes in resource adequacy values. So as we conclude the data collection and scenario definition phase, we'll next immerse ourselves in the very intensely in the modeling work itself, which is a pretty heavy lift. As mentioned earlier, we will then present the initial results at workshop 3 in September with a corresponding board update of that material. And then this gets followed up with workshop 4 with final results. So now I'll pass it over to Brooke Aiken to talk more specifically about the stakeholder engagement through the first 2 workshops.
Thank you, Shannon. Good afternoon. I'm Brooke Aiken, our Director of Economic Development and External Relations. To build on Shannon's comments, as part of the Integrated System Plan, we continue to follow the IAP2 process, which, for those less familiar, that's the International Association for Public Participation. And we really use those principles that include informing, consulting, and involving stakeholders throughout the planning process. And our goal here, to build upon Shannon's comments, is to ensure our customers and stakeholders see their role involving this and have meaningful opportunities to provide input throughout the process, as well as ask questions, including involving the modeling itself and the future scenarios we're working towards. So it's really a team effort across the organization here. And in addition to working with Shannon and Dan Lenahan and their teams, I wanted to also call out Kate Thomas and the corporate marketing and communications team, as well as broadly our customer service team, and Yessie on our community outreach and stakeholder engagement team, who's really been a master facilitator, especially in the public workshop process. So you can see here an overview of how we reached our customers and stakeholders. We reached thousands across multiple channels, and this includes digital outreach, it includes social media, targeted email campaigns, direct touch points with customers and key contacts among several different stakeholder groups, from government affairs to environmental. And our employees more broadly have supported the outreach as well. It really sets the foundation here to understand the scale of who we reached and ultimately who commented. So you can see some of the stats referenced here that are driving engagement, both inclusive of those public workshops we've hosted, as well as outside of those settings, how people have engaged. So we've had several thousand page visits to the OPPD Community Connect platform, several hundred workshop views, as well as downloads outside of those meetings, which they are recorded for anyone that wants to tune in. And then we've had over 10,000 social media impressions as a part of this as well. The next slide calls out more on involving the workshops, as far as who participated and how. And for both workshops, we had great participation reflecting residential customers, local government, commercial and industrial customers, as well as advocacy and special interest groups. More than 100 external participants participated in the workshops itself, as well as some of the polling that we did that Shannon called out earlier. So these events, they're great for us. They provide us with in-the-moment customer questions, as well as feedback and comments about the modeling, the resources and assumptions. And it helps us also establish context in terms of the reach and participation, being that it was much broader than the number of people who submitted written comments. So you can see some of the stats reflected here. You may notice too, we had several registrations that didn't actually attend. Those folks received follow-up from us as far as the workshop recordings and executive summaries post those workshops, and have the ability to provide feedback and ask questions as well as tune into the recordings. So the next slide highlights some of the themes from the engaged participants. We heard consistent themes across the different channels, whether that be on the Community Connect platform, through our board contact forms, or other various ways to provide input. And it's important to note that in terms of the volume of written comments we have, mostly they've come from a small number of highly engaged individuals and groups. And this is consistent in syncing with Kate Thomas and her team. When we look at social media engagement benchmarks, about 1 to 5% of people deeply engage in content. So we see a consistent methodology here. The themes reflect what we heard from engaged participants, but are not necessarily to be interpreted as representing the full customer base. And this is an important distinction to note in terms of the intensity of specific themes. So most cited themes here certainly involve different types of generation, different technology, additional sentiment surrounding demand side management, energy efficiency. And this input provides us as an organization with valuable insight into communities' interests, needs, priorities, and areas where we can offer additional education or where engagement may be needed ahead. So overall, super helpful in our process. The next slide highlights what's ahead. So we will continue to expand our outreach and engagement even into this summer as we build upon the next phase of the ISP. Customers and stakeholders, they can stay involved by visiting oppdcommunityconnect.com/ISP to learn more about the process, leave comments, ask questions. Registration for our next workshop, which is in September, it will open soon. And we will continue to promote this across all of our OPPD channels. And a closing comment to this piece is, we certainly see the ISP as a long-term community-informed planning effort, and we really appreciate the participation we've had to date, including among some of our board members, and remain committed to a transparent and inclusive process ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any comments or questions for Brooke?
A question, if I may. I was noticing that, and you referenced that we didn't have a real broad response to the workshops. So I hear from mayors and county people, so it's not too late for me to get in contact with them and say, hey, give your input on this ISP because it matters. Am I correct in that assumption?
That is correct, Director Spurgeon. We'd welcome that, and certainly if there's more we can do in one-on-one settings, we're happy to offer that as well. But yeah, I think that would be very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Shannon and Brooke, excuse me, Shannon and Brooke, thank you both. Any other comments from the board or questions? Okay. Let's go to Mr. Vi, please.
All right, good afternoon. I think everybody's aware of this, but just driving around town, you can see we have a significant amount of construction taking place all over our 13 counties. And, in the spirit of public power, we definitely want to provide transparency into some of the activities that we have going on in relationship to these projects. We have Shane Hansen here today, who's our Director of T&D Engineering, and he's going to give us an update on the Southwest Bellevue Transmission Project. And with that, I'll turn it over to him.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Troy. Shane Hansen, Director of Engineering here. I apologize. I'm just pinged our IT group, but my video is having a hard time loading, so I'll be working on that in the background. But again, thank you. Wanted to provide this update today on the Bellevue Reliability Project. We will specifically be talking about the Southeast Bellevue Transmission Project area here, which is shaded in blue. Overall, we've been starting this project, which is going to be a pretty robust upgrade of our transmission substation and distribution systems in Bellevue and surrounding Bellevue, really to focus on reliability and resilience. Some things that we found out during the 2019 flood that did affect a lot of this area, and the needs to provide some better reliability for and additionally, the growth that we're seeing in this area of Bellevue, specifically around the new Good Life District. So this will create some long-term upgrades and rebuilds of these aging areas. And again, we have this link down here, and I believe it was mentioned at the start of the meeting today, but OPPD Community Connect is always available and does contain project updates as we move along with different portions of this project. So I invite the community and the board themselves to go there, and you can provide your information to even get emailed updates as the projects do progress. So Aaron, if you go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Southeast Bellevue Transmission Route, today we are here to announce this great milestone to the project, where we are listed here on the map in yellow is the final route that was selected by a cross-functional team of subject matter experts, as well as following our IAP2 process of getting that public participation. So when we look at some of the statistics, we did hold 6 public events, including local leader meetings, webinars, open houses, and then just some community engagement events as well. So it was really intentional for us to get out with the community, hearing from the leaders, folks that are driving some of the growth in Bellevue, but then also really wanting to understand the impacts to our teams that are working in and around this potential line route. So we had approximately 1,200 visits to the project webpage on OP Community Connect, which is a fantastic traffic. And depending on the type of project, we do see us utilizing these different webinars and online portals as great tools that allows folks to really get that information and provide some feedback at their leisure, that so if they aren't able to attend the open houses. And then ultimately open houses, we did see some lower attendance with 19 attendees, but still great, robust communications. And I'd also like to call out and thank our board of directors who did attend several of these, and members of our executive leadership team, and even the elected officials throughout. Not only did they attend the local leader sessions, but came to the open houses as well to hear firsthand some of that engagement we were getting from the public on this project. So really the consistent feedback we heard from the public that isn't uncommon is, establishing and following routes with existing infrastructure, right? So we hear a lot that at times of following roads or other existing infrastructure that exists here. So, want to highlight that the route really does follow a lot of Highway 34, and then ultimately does traverse follow the railroad portion there, and ultimately the core levee along the Papillion Creek there. So while this allows us to avoid as many conflicts as possible, we do want to continue to highlight that since we are moving near the levee, there are going to be some close coordination and collaboration with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers there to make sure that we are building it in such a way that will not impact the levee itself, because there has been a lot of investment in that by the Corps here after that 2019 flood. So next slide, Aaron. So finally, what's next? So the Southeast Bellevue Transmission Project, specifically the area we're talking about, we'll really continue on with landowner engagement here and starting off engineering design. So now that we have a announced route, those folks that are directly impacted by this route will have some more one-on-one communication with our right-of-way coordinators for this project, gaining a lot more feedback as we really start into the design of what this line will look like. So have an example here. This is again a 69 kV transmission line. The lowest of our transmission voltages is what we will be building. Moving into 27 will be a lot of that easement acquisition and distribution construction. We are having some distribution rework to be able to support that load growth, but also there will be some distribution hardening and relocation that happens as a part of this transmission routing itself. Then ultimately we'll be moving into construction late 27 into 28 with this portion of the Bellevue Reliability Project being energized at the end of 2028. And finally, we have listed here in the bottom right, but there is the Old Town segment that we had specifically broken apart because they are on slightly different timelines. So routing continues for that segment of the transmission project. We will be coming back to the board here planned in November 2026 to announce that final route with the similar project timeline to follow and energization of that segment in Q2 of 2029. So with that, I will open it up to any questions.
Shane, thanks for the presentation, and to all the folks that did work on this. Are there any comments from the board or any questions? All right, without seeing any, I think that's it. Okay, Mr. Fisher, please.
All right, yes, thank you. So the next item concerns the property rights needed for the Southeast Bellevue Transmission Project. In order to move the project forward, OPPD will need to acquire a number of easements. And while, of course, we will make every reasonable effort to secure those rights voluntarily, the use of eminent domain may be necessary if agreement cannot be reached with all the landowners. So at this time, I will turn it over to Jake Farrell. He is our manager of real property and land management, and will help us walk through the specifics of these easement needs, the acquisition process, and the overall board authorization.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. Quick mic check. Can you guys hear me okay? Perfect. Thank you. Thanks to Shane and to Pete for teeing that all up. The teams have worked really diligently now as we transition into discussions with directly impacted landowners. This is a tool that is generally used and important to negotiation. So we've got about 31 tracks, properties along this route that some of this is determined which side of the road and some is not. And as engineers determine optimal routes and where we cross and all of those things, this will narrow a little bit, but generally speaking, as we've done many times in the past, we come to you and ask you for the right of eminent domain should all reasonable efforts be unfruitful in negotiations. But this starts the discussions now with the Southeast Bellevue project. Negotiations for these easements will actually start in 2027, but starting to build that relationship, and this question gets asked. So really proposing a resolution to allow for the use of eminent domain as necessary on the Southeast Bellevue project. And with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Director Corr.
All right, thank you, Jake. Any questions or comments from the board? Perfect.
Just a comment that I liked the term that Jake used, all reasonable efforts, because that is the honoring of the community that OPP does. We don't just say we need this. There's conversation, there's offers back and forth, there's sometimes quite a bit of negotiation, and the eminent domain effort is truly a last resort. So I admire that. And just, I didn't comment on the last item, but been to a couple of the meetings for the South Bellevue Transmission Project, and just really want to compliment the teams that were present, welcomed people, did a lot of teaching, in the course of discussing this. And I thought they went very smoothly and really reflect a lot of care and planning in carrying them out. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Spurgeon. I'd be remiss if I didn't call out Brooke Aiken and Lori Zagorski and their teams. It's a joint effort between our groups to make sure that those happen. So appreciate those calls out.
All right. Mr. Farrell, thank you. I don't see any other comments or questions. And we'll kick it over to Mr. Fernandez, please.
Thank you, Chair Carr. This is our annual cycle of compensation adjustments. So what I'm about to present, I discussed in more detail with the board in closed session, talking specifically about employees and the executive leadership team, their goals and their performance. To add some perspective for the public, the way OPPD compensates all employees, all exempt employees, we run different studies on different frequencies, every 2, every 3 years, where we benchmark each position or group of positions with what the market is paying for those. In the case of exempt employees, we do that on a regional basis. In the case of executives, we do that on a national basis because that's who we are competing with. That determines a midpoint, or what we call a market point for each one of these positions. That's the average of what other utilities are paying for the same type of position doing similar jobs. The compensation that you're going to see here in just a minute, it includes the market adjustment that I am recommending to the board to move these executives to as close to the desired comparable ratio against that midpoint. You will see that in all cases we are at or below the midpoint, which means OPPD is paying less than the market. The other component of this is the merit increase, and this has to do with each executive's performance. Just like any other exempt employee, we establish goals at the beginning of the year for the ensuing year, and we talked about expectations, meeting those expectations, below expectations, or above expectations. Throughout the course of the year, just like any other manager or people here at OPPD, I meet with my team. We discuss their goals. We discuss any progress, any barriers that they may get throughout the year. And then at the end of the year, we do a thorough review of their performance against goals, and we have this conversation. So that's the framework. Once the performance is done, something that's very, very important to me and to employees, we heard this back from employees, from union leadership, is that an above expectations rating for an executive should have a very similar salary increase than an above expectations rating for any other employee in the district, right, proportionally with the percentage. So what do you have here? It includes that percent. In this case, it's a 4.25% for merit. For the team did an amazing job. I explained to the board, I review each executive individually, and I assess their performance individually. Some years, some executives exceed expectations and others meet expectations. This past year was just a very, very challenging year, and they all rose to the occasion and did a phenomenal job meeting and exceeding the expectations I had of them. So what you see here is a present salary. Also a reminder to members of the public, contrary to investor-owned utilities, what you see here is what we get, right? We don't have bonus payments, we don't have stock options, we don't have the entire compensation of an executive is listed here. You see their present salary, you see where they are today with a percent of midpoint, and the proposed salary. For those executives who have been on the job for 3 years or more, the idea is to get them to 95% of the midpoint, and that's what you see here. It's a combination of market adjustment and merit improvement or merit adjustment. And you can see that here on the screen. If the board approves this resolution, the effective date will be May 31st of this year, so it'll be retroactive, so that it starts on June, just a few weeks ago. So happy to answer any questions from the board.
Am I to understand that you benchmark on the regional basis and then you benchmark nationally as well? So the market rate increases that are included in the total here. So why do we use that?
The benchmark?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, that's very important, because those are the jobs that the executive leadership team could have in other utilities, right? It puts the market data in front of us to say, how much should you pay for this type of service? Well, we have our own internal valuation, but we are competing against other utilities. So we want to make sure that we are not staying too far behind of other utilities. Otherwise, we have a retention problem, or attracting talent would be the opposite end of that. But at the same time, it's important for us to know that we are not overpaying, that we are not in a place where we are responsible, we're accountable to our ratepayers, and we want to make sure that we're presenting the board with market data that shows that what we are paying, or what we propose to pay our executives, is in line with comparable positions in other utilities of our size around the nation. Again, not counting bonuses or long-term incentives, and those are separate. We don't have that, but this is base salary to base salary comparison.
Thank you. And I wonder, this midpoint idea, I don't know if the public kind of understands that. I'm going to look at one of the salaries there. It's a little over 500,000. Does that mean that that's the middle, that there are people in a similar position that are making well over $1 million in that same position?
Not necessarily. It depends. You could have people who are potentially making over $1 million, and people who are making $200,000. The combination of all of those results in an average of 509,000. What you don't see here is the distribution of salaries, how widespread the distribution is. What we do here is try to maintain consistency year over year into the pool of utilities and comparable utilities that we use, so that we can reach to that midpoint. Our policy at OPPD for executives and for exempt employees is we have a midpoint, and then we have 20% below and 20% above the midpoint. Right? When you're hiring a brand new employee with no experience in this position, you usually bring them at between 80 and 85% of the midpoint. But if you have enough experience with 3 or more years of experience in that position, then you should be very close to that midpoint, that market. To the extent that you stay in that position for a longer period of time, then it is possible for you to be above the midpoint. But as you can see here, that really doesn't happen here in this case with the executive team.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments from the board? Seeing none. Oh, Director Spurgeon, go ahead.
If I may, just to talk about this a little bit more. Market adjustments, which we are talking about a little more clearly this year than we did last year. These have the qualities of being fair and egalitarian, and they are also a way of maintaining morale and a sense of loyalty to the business, as well as responding to the external pressures of shortages of qualified, talented professionals that are needed to do the work. I just want to, for our listening public, OPPD has an excellent reputation among its public power peers and exceeds some of the benchmarks of investor-owned and utilities as well. I mean, like really exceeds, like customer satisfaction just outshines them all. And Javier can't resist boasting about how well OPPD is doing when he's doing his large public power meetings and American Public Power Association gatherings. So we know that OPPD has been at the forefront of addressing many of the challenges that have been laid at the doorstep of all the utilities in these most recent years. So maintaining that appropriate market adjustment compensation makes us less open to the risk of having our professional staff poached by another utility. So it is an investment, a way of investing in the continued well-being of our organization. So just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. All right. I'm just checking here. I don't think I see anybody else. Okay. Thank you. With that, we'll move on to CEO performance review and compensation adjustment. And I'm going to kick that back over to Director Spurgeon as Chair of Governance to start this off.
Right. Thank you very much. The corporate officer performance reviews and compensation adjustment took about 45 minutes of our closed session this morning, and we spent about an hour on CEO performance review. And so this is our proposal for our CEO. Present salary of $893,193, which is 91.8% of the midpoint. Our goal is to have everyone who is qualified, has been in the job at least 3 years, who is meeting the expectations, to be at 95% of the midpoint as much as possible. So the proposed salary is $937,853, which brings him to 96.4% of the midpoint. And the effective date would be May 31 or June 1st to apply of this year. And I will take comments from any members of the board who would like to share.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with echoing some of the comments that were made for the rest of the ELT. There's a robust process that goes to coming to these conclusions. We have an annual review amongst the board, and then we engage with outside folks to determine that we're landing in the right market and use our review to determine if we're landing in the right place for merit adjustment. So thank you to Mr. Fernandez for the work over the past year in his time at OPPD. Thank you to Director Spurgeon and some internal folks at OPPD for putting some really valuable info to help us come to these conclusions in front of us.
Other comments? Please jump in.
I guess I'll just add, I think Javier has demonstrated strong performance over the last year. And I certainly think that he has demonstrated the ability to effectively lead OPPD at times at some challenging issues that we faced over the course of the year, and that the proposed pay raise is keeping well within the range of what's appropriate, and I strongly support it.
Thank you. Anyone else? I hear no more comments, Chair Core.
All right. Thank you, Director Spurgeon. Let's move to the confirmation of board meeting agenda, please. Are there any consent action items that any directors would like to move to board discussion action items?
Yeah. Are we planning to have the executive or CEO compensation on the discussion list? Looks like no.
We certainly can. I was.
Yeah, we always
I think
start. Oh, sorry, just for clarity, we always start with all on the consent action items, and then at this time move to discussion action items. So please key in.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure if Director Spurgeon wanted to offer that, but I think that would be a helpful opportunity for directors to provide feedback during the board meeting about both of those items. So I would suggest that both the executive and the CEO performance review and compensation adjustments be on the discussion item list.
Yep. Thank you, Director Williams. I'd agree. Are there any other consent action items? SD2, the monitor report, might be a suggestion, but we had a good review of it today.
Director Coy, I would also agree with that. And again, as an opportunity to highlight the success of the last year while talking about where we anticipate things going forward, because rates are the primary way that our customers engage with utility. So I would appreciate an opportunity for that discussion and to hear from anybody specifically on that topic on Thursday. Thanks.
Okay. So I am, Ms. Lane, I'm tracking items 7, 11, and 12. Please move those to discussion action items. Are there any other board members that would like anything else moved over?
Well, heavens, if we're talking about the monitoring report, why don't we talk about the policy revision and why that's important? This is an opportunity to educate the general public, all 20 of whom maybe followed this meeting to the end, but are going to be very interested at the public board meeting. So I think in many ways, the more education we can do, the better it is. And I apologize for being a slacker at proposing 11 and 12 be moved there. I just thought someone else would jump in, and so thank you for doing so, Director Williams. Appreciate that.
That's great. We got to it either way. So thank you, Director Spurgeon and Director Williams. We'll move 7, 8, 11, and 12. So with that, before we adjourn, we'll take comments from the public on items of district business. Comments made by all parties during the meeting are part of the official public record. We'll take comments via WebEx. For WebEx attendees, if you wish to make a comment, please send the meeting host a message using the chat feature or utilize the hand raise feature. Detailed instructions can be found on the OPPD website at the link shown on the screen. When I call on a member of the public to speak, please affirm that we can hear you before commencing with your comments. Please state your name, address, and the name of any organization or person you represent. Each individual will be allotted 3 minutes per matter pending. To assist you, we'll use the timer on the screen and signal you when 30 seconds remain, as well as when time is up. If you have written materials, please email to them to corporatesecretary@oppd.com, and they'll be received on our behalf. For all attendees, please direct your comments to me. I'll either respond to you directly or defer response to another board member or officer of the district. The board values and welcomes civil, respectful, clear, and concise communication from the public. During public comments, speakers should refrain from repetitious, profane, or irrelevant comments. Speakers shall refrain from polling the board as such vote is not on the agenda and prohibited by law. Do any members of the public have comments on items of district business? Please send a chat to the meeting host or use the hand raise feature in WebEx. Telephone users can press *3 to raise their hand.
David Corbin.
Sir, if you can hear me, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. David Corbin, 1002 North 49th Street, representing the Nebraska Sierra Club. I appreciate the creativity, insight, and timing regarding your report on bonds with many technicalities and complexities that I don't pretend to understand. And it's great that OPPD compares so favorably on many indicators, including rates with other utilities. However, it is important to show the same creativity with customer engagement. For example, Director Spurgeon mentioned access to programs to help those with energy burden. Why can certain segments of the customer owners access information about assistance programs and others can't or don't? Those are important questions. The social media data that were shown were not that impressive considering you have over 800,000 customers. Peer utility group comparisons are also important to compare with utilities regarding energy burden, how you approach energy burden, and as I mentioned at the last board meeting, behavioral change programs. Also on-bill financing and energy efficiency. How do you compare with others, or how do you compare with some of the best? Add some inspirational goals and not just comparing the averages of other utilities. I encourage you to reach the same level of excellence regarding energy efficiency, plug-in solar, and energy burden that you do in so many other areas. Regarding these more creative approaches, I will mention that I heard an energy podcast, and I thought this was an important statement. Focus not on what you can't do, but what you can do. And then finally, regarding the comments about legislative issues, we in the Sierra Club found that OPPD was taking stands on bills that we didn't understand at all, that didn't seem to fit with what you've been saying today. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for your comments. Ms. Lane, are there any other comments?
No other comments.
Okay. Thank you. With no other comments, this meeting's adjourned at 12:50.